United States, that at every turn, political, economic, cultural, or otherwise, that Black America showed any signs of success, it was forced back down through political violence. The Klan, which as a Texan, very much was part of our history. And actually in El Paso, around this same time, you mentioned 1919, the Klan literally took over our local government, our school boards, our schools were renamed after quote unquote heroes of either the Confederacy or the Texas Revolution. And so that's why I asked how organized the Red Summer of 1919 was, because it seemed as though there was a very organized effort throughout the country to keep down any signs of success or autonomy or independence. And then I've read at a minimum 300 people were killed, but you mentioned, Pastor, it could have been in the thousands, and we don't know. And I read that one of the founders of Greenwood was assumed to have been lynched, but then there are reports that he survived and was in California, and it just goes to show you how little we know, because those lives were not thought to be important. And then the last piece of information I thought was interesting was the green card issued to African Americans in Tulsa. The fear was so great that there would be reprisals, which it would be hard to blame anybody for feeling that way and wanting to visit reprisals on those who killed relatives, friends or family, that you had to carry a green card should you want to be able to work or be in the community. That's about the extent of my knowledge on it, but I of course came here to learn and to listen and to understand that larger history. And I appreciate, Pastor, that you put it in the context of 400 years, and then just the last 100 years since 1919, what's been happening. And then, of course, Greg made a great point last night about where we are today in 2019, alive and well in many of these issues right now. So
right. Well, that's an amazing start, and that is why Chief and I we wanted to do what we call the real Black Wall Street tour, because oftentimes our history is whitewashed, it's pieces hidden from it intentionally, and so we like to just really be the history recoverers and tell the truth, the good, the bad, and the ugly of it. And so that is why we just started doing these tours on our own, because we have to tell our own stories, and I think that's so important. But just to start off, I want to talk about a little bit of Oklahoma history. Oklahoma, before it became a state, it was Indian territory. And I know a lot of you heard about the 5 civilized tribes, the Trail of Tears. So when the 5 civilized tribes came on the Trail of Tears, they had slaves with them. Black people, us, we were slaves with the 5 civilized tribes. It was not a happy-go-lucky time, as some may have said. It was not. So when the 1866 came, the 1866 Indian Treaty, a lot of those 5 civilized tribes, they released their slaves, and they became citizens of those tribes. When they became citizens of those tribes, they received citizens' benefits, just as a citizen of those tribes would. And with that, they got 160 acres of land per person. So if there was a family of 12, each of those 12 members would have 160 acres of land, including babies, children, adults. And let me just show you this map here. All of the blue in this is actually creek territory. Each blue square represents 160 acres of land that was given to what is called freedmen. So that's a big area.
That's just one tribe.
Right, that's just one tribe. And the Creek Nation gave over 1 million acres of land. And so you have Cherokee, Choctaw, all the other tribes are in here too that gave 160 acres of land. So Edwin McCabe, who founded Langston, Oklahoma. Have you ever heard of Langston University, to HBCU in Langston, Oklahoma? His goal was to have Oklahoma become a Black state. And he wanted it to be a black state because just coming from slavery, this was to be the promised land. This is what they called it. This was the promised land where you could raise your families, build communities, earn a living, where you didn't have to worry about lynchings, Jim Crow. You didn't have to worry about that because at this time in Indian Territory, the only people who could own land was black men and Indians. That was it until 1907 when Oklahoma became a state.
I did not know that. I did not know that.
So Edwin McCabe, he would send recruiters to go out through the South and even some across the country to say, you all need to come make a living in Indian Territory. This is where it's at. We will help you. And that's what they did. It was community. And one of the things that me and Chief always try to debunk is you hear a lot of people say the only reason why Greenwood was successful was because of segregation. No, it was a state of mind. They understood that they needed each other. This was the promised land. This is what they were building. So it wasn't segregation. But by 1920, Oklahoma had over 50 black towns, 50 black townships. Oklahoma today is still the number one state who has the most black towns in it today.
How do we define a black town?
You have Boley.
How do you define it?
Oh,
Like,
black towns is actually founded by black people. Majority of the black people live in that town. Most of them are still mayors of a lot of these towns. They're small towns, but that's how it is defined as black towns. And actually, one of the oldest black towns is, I always have a hard time pronouncing it, Tallahassee. And it means old town. It's a Creek term. It means old town. And it was 1868. And some of the Creek Indians abandoned it, but they just gave it to their slaves. So they kept the town and just built, and it still exists today. So we have an amazing history of that. Now, when Oklahoma became a state in 1907, the first law here was Jim Crow. So in 1907, what also came with Jim Crow is what was called as taxes. So that family of 12 that I mentioned before with the 160 acres of land, taxes was due on that land that they just could not pay. So, and then on a lot of those acres of land was oil wells, which made a lot of black people wealthy during that time. And one of those people, if you ever heard of Sarah Rector, the 11-year-old girl here in Oklahoma, she was from Taft, Oklahoma, which is another black town, Taft, and still exists today. She became a millionaire. In 1918, she became a millionaire. And it was just, it was talk of over the country. The NAACP was hearing stories about, everyone wanted to come and marry her, even at her young age. They was trying to figure out ways to get rid of her parents, because during that time you would get a white guardianship on the acres of land.
That's right.
Even if you had parents, because they considered the parents to be incompetent to handle that type of land ownership and money that they would get. And a lot of times these white guardians would rob them of their money. Today there's a huge house right on South Peoria by Philbrook of Sarah Rector's guardian.
Is this the Osage? Nisha, I just read a book, Killers of the Flower Moon,
Yes.
about the oil wealth of the Osage and how their parents were being killed, and the children turned over to white guardians who in many cases had killed their parents
Yes.
to become the guardians and inherit the oil wealth.
Absolutely.
Is this the same
different
It's
story.
a different story.
same
Yes.
motivation? It sounds
Yeah,
like the same
absolutely.
amount
Exactly.
of wealth. Wow.
Exactly.
And her name was Sarah Rector.
Sarah Rector, and you can look her up. And an interesting story about Sarah Rector is she was getting $300 per day just from the oil well on her 160 acres of land. And there were stories about her because they would see her with these raggedy clothes, no shoes, horrible living conditions, and they were like, how is she living like this when she's producing all this money every day? What is her guardian doing? So word got out to W.B. Du Bois with the NAACP. They came here to rescue her, and they were able to get the bank to say that she was white. I don't know how they did that, but they did, because that was the only way her money was going to be protected. And then W.E.B. Du Bois, he contacted Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington then let her become a student in his boarding school. So she moved away and she went to his boarding school, where she later graduated from Tuskegee. And that's where she married and lived a great life. And she did even take her mother with her as well. So that's a very interesting story. You can Google that story. But just to go back to the history, this is how they started to lose a lot of the land. And then also, then families would bury each other on their land. Well, that became against the law. So they were losing land. They were, any way they could find to take these black people's land is what they did. But coming back to Greenwood, there was all those 50 towns, those townships. They would actually come to Greenwood to spend their money. So on the weekends, Greenwood was the place to be. You could come see shows, you go to the theater, you buy the finest dresses. Greenwood was the place to be. So Greenwood wasn't only just circulating the dollar, as they say, over 7, some say 10, 15 times in this community, but all these other black townships was coming here. There was a train that went right through the middle of Black Wall Street. So you have all these people from these towns coming, spending money in Greenwood. And the census in 1920 says that there was 1 million people in Oklahoma in 1920. 1 million black people. And so you can Google that and look that up as well. So I will go ahead and let Chief go from there.
So the population of Greenwood at the time, by 1921, was in excess of 12,000 people. I want to give you, so the story we're going to tell is like hearing from the people who built the pyramids, but you've never seen one, right? And they're trying to explain to you, like, it was so extravagant, so your mind can't fathom it. So we started doing this tour because we wanted you to be able to see an outline of. So this is where we are right now. We're right here in this church, Mount Vernon. Okay, this is only 10% of the district that we're looking at, from here to here. The bottom parts of the map were intentionally cut off, so you couldn't go the next 20 blocks and see how much development was actually in Greenwood. This is 1916. By 1921, it had grown even more. So all of this was completely destroyed. I mean, just burnt to nothing and bombed. The rail system that she talked about is this one. It runs, this is Greenwood Avenue. That rail system ran straight down Greenwood. The train depot was down here. 500 people in excess would get off the train inside the Greenwood district on a daily basis. You can't have enough barbershops. You can't have enough grocers. You can't have enough of anything. So everybody became industrious and basically took advantage of the oil boom and all the people who saw success because the population grew, just so big in a very short period, 15 years. From the moment O.W. Gurley got here to 1921, we haven't seen anything like that. So, and just to show you how resourceful they were, they rebuilt Greenwood to 85% in 5 years. Because they had the help of those satellite towns of 50 townships. Not only that, a lot of the survivors hid money inside chimneys, and they would take brick and have spaces made where they kept money. So if you watch some of the old footage and you see people rumbling through the bricks and trying to go through, they're going back looking for money. And I heard that from Wes Young, who was a survivor, because I was like, how did they build it so fast? Where did the money come from? He said, these people were brilliant. You gotta understand, we've already survived 400 plus years of chattel slavery, you know, and then being a runaway and trying to figure out how to survive on your own. You come up with the most ingenious ways to store money, to, you know, do whatever you need to do to survive. So this is Greenwood. Okay. This is 1918. These are all the World War I veterans that took a photo in front of the Dreamland Theater. And you can see the buildings behind it. Or this is all on Greenwood. It's when you get down on Greenwood and you get to see these buildings, and you get to see what the destruction that the highway did. You don't know the level of destruction until you're actually seeing images of what was there.
When did the highway come through?
I believe it was 1968, I believe. Yeah.
And not an accident that the alignment of the highway came through.
Oh, not at all. Not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it completely tore out the infrastructure of the business district. Because there were hotels. In fact, the very spot where the highway is at, there were hotels there. And it took out all of that.
And cut the city off.
Yeah, completely.
There's the panel wall
Cut
separated.
the
Yeah.
community away from the rest of it.
This is Vernon AME, the church we're in now, in 1916, pre-basement. Okay. Right. Now, how we normally do our tour is we take you to all the places, we tell the story so that you can know where was Dick Rowland and Sarah Page, what building did that happen in, where, you know, what location, so you can see the relationship between downtown and Greenwood. And
That was the incident that is alleged to have sparked it in an elevator. She yells out rape.
Absolutely.
The newspapers start publishing headlines trying to inflame.
That story. Absolutely.
And sorry, that was in this building?
No, this is the courthouse building.
Okay.
But that building this is that building right there. It happened in this building right here, called the Drexel Building, on the second floor. So the sheriff who arrested Dick Rowland, they knew that they knew each other. Everybody in town knew they knew each other. So it wasn't an uncommon practice. How would he know exactly what building to go to, second floor, where the bathroom's at, right? And she never filed any charges against him, right? So they just said, let's just hold him till everything dies down. That was the initial plan. But Lloyd Jones, the owner of the Tulsa Tribune, wrote the article that sparked the fire. Not only that, you had a convention happening at the same time. The Sons of the Confederate were having a convention. So the climate was perfect, right? It was like everything you need to create this climate of fear and anxiety and turmoil and chaos was ripe. Everything is it's like I say all the time, we're actually revisiting history. We're watching history right now recycle itself, literally, because there are so many parallels between the climate now and the climate then. So many parallels.
Yeah.
Because now you got this collective mindset, this collective group of people who are looking at the world and saying, this world is changing. Look downtown. They're looking from these buildings here, looking at Greenwood, and saying, look, this is the 20s. What's happening in the 20s politically and economically? Depression. But they're not seeing a depression in Greenwood. What is the problem? How can we eliminate that? Not only that, they are in prime real estate area. Prime, all the rail systems roll straight through the middle of Greenwood and down around Greenwood. 3 rail systems in that one area. So the imagery is, this is going to become the Mecca. It is going to truly become the promised land for these people who we have dehumanized, marginalized, and made the rest of the world believe it. Now we don't have any evidence, right? They've broken every stereotype that we've placed on them, you know, to keep them confined and to do whatever horrific crimes we can commit against these people. So as long as we can't show people in a human light, and we can, like Trump is doing, you know, these criminals, these rapists, these same narrative, because the founder, the Tulsa Tribune writer, was saying the same thing about the inhabitants of Greenwood at the exact same time. Prostitution, drugs, guns, everything. Same exact rhetoric. So the climate, everything that people are afraid will happen or can happen is destined to happen if we keep this going the way it's going.
And that's how El Paso was able to happen.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Without a doubt.
Gadsden was able to happen.
Without a doubt. So Dick Rowland was taken to this building, to the courthouse building. Top of the building. They kept him up here. The interesting thing is, how is it that all of a sudden you have almost 10,000 men in front of the courthouse that it's not pre-orchestrated? You know how hard it is to get 500 people at a rally? You know, like really. But you get 10,000 people in a small town in hours. That's orchestrated. There's nothing anybody can tell me that was not orchestrated. I think the people at the time understood. You don't see a lot of writings and teachings about people talking about the Klan this, the Klan that, because there was no separation. They didn't make a distinction between the Klan and police or politicians or whoever. There was no distinction. It just, you were a mayor who just happened to be a member of the Klan, right? But the Klan had its ways of doing things because they wanted to create this idea of Klan leadership or Klan control, which basically gave people an outlet. Because when you went to court and they said they wanted to sue you or somebody had evidence against you as a Klansman, they would purge you from the Klan rolls. So that when you go to court, you can swear under oath, I'm not a member of the Klan. Right? So it was, I'm telling you, it was well orchestrated in that regard.
I'd read that leaders of the Greenwood community at or around this point try to intervene peacefully to protect Roland's life,
yes.
and also just to make sure that justice is carried out. Let's go through
That's right.
the due process and see if this actually took place, and try to maybe bring the temperature down. I don't know the right way to describe it. Is that true?
That is true.
They came to the courthouse as well.
O.W. Gurley, O.B. Mann, Smitherman, these are all made big businessmen in Greenwood. So they're looking at it like, look, our whole town could burn down with this. We want to stop that. Whatever help he needs, and veterans, they all went to the courthouse early in the evening. Said, Sheriff McCullough, we'd like to help you, assist you in any way possible. He told them, he reassured them, I got this under control, nothing is going to happen to him. There's not going to be a lynching. Well, they didn't trust it because just 2 years prior, they had lynched a white man. And they said, look, if they're lynched their own people, there's no way they're not going to lynch that boy. So, and they had already stopped a previous lynching a couple years earlier as well. So the idea was, we can't let that happen again because these people are already uppity. They got an attitude that we don't like. Okay, so second time, a spy went into Greenwood and said, they're getting ready to lynch you. Now somebody has incited the group to come back. So this time they come back, it's about 75 plus. Maybe, I've heard rumors of 75 to 300 men came back. They came back to the courthouse. They offered help again. One man said, what are you gonna do with that gun, nigga? He said, I'm gonna use it if I have to. The man grabbed the gun went off, first casualty. Now it's wartime. And everybody's retreating.
And that happened in front of the courthouse?
In front of the courthouse building. So on our tour, we take you there and we show you the maps, or we show you how they retreated and which streets they went down. So you can kind of visualize that in your mind and understand how everything went down. Then you have the dividing line, which is the Frisco tracks. That's what divides the city from black and white. Those people at Greenwood already knew. Once that second warning came, prepare yourself to defend Greenwood. Now you got all those World War I veterans who are prepared to defend their community because they've already experienced the Red Summer of 1919. And they taught them a valuable lesson. You can't have a peaceful community and not be able to defend it. They had created an incubator society where people like Olivia Hooker, who passed at 103 last year, she said, as a little girl, I never even knew what racism was. I never met a racist my whole life. In 1919, 1920, 1921, all her years of life, she never experienced it because they created, for lack of better words, their own Wakanda. You know, they protected and defended their children. It was like therapy. Like, we want to create this healing process, a place where we can heal from all of the tragedies of the past and reinvent ourselves. We've already built a country on our backs, blood, sweat, and tears. Why come we can't build our own towns and our own cities, right? When they did it, but they created a safe haven. So they literally had in their community everything a human being could want. There was nothing you could not want. They didn't have to tell them about the past tragedy. They just told them the strength we have, how we overcame the stuff that we had to overcome. But they never knew the things that their families had experienced, and their greatest fear. People say, why did they never talk about it? Because they didn't want the next generation to grow up with that hatred of what they felt in their hearts. And they said, not only that, if there was even an inkling that you did it, the whole year of 1922 was about kidnappings and whipping parties. The whole year of 1922, that's what the Klan did in Tulsa, to make sure nobody ever spoke about it again. So the conspiracy of silence, it was real. It was very real. So,
Before he goes into that,
yeah.
I wanted to add on to the fact about what he just mentioned. This land that was developed, as he stated, just a few generations outside of slavery, and it goes against every notion that Republicans try to denote and put on African Americans that we need a handout. This was before Pell Grants. This was before affirmative action. This was before any governmental service. We didn't have any grant organizations to do this. We didn't have any small minority business loans. This was completely grown by black people. We literally pulled ourselves up by our own bootstraps. And that counters every argument. As Chief was saying, that infuriates people. You know, for them to, as you pointed to the building, they could look over and see this wealth, and without any help from anybody. And so it just goes against that whole notion that, you know, the welfare queens are all this modern day crap that's really racist. Greenwood defied that. And how did this country repay them? They destroyed it. They destroyed it.
It couldn't stand.
No.
You couldn't allow that to stand and
No.
defy everyone's prejudice or stereotype or the story that those in power were trying to tell the country about who we were.
Right. Yeah.
And then the government destroyed it the second time.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's right.
It was through the highway.
Right,
coming
with
through.
urban removal.
Urban renewal.
Yeah, and so it was, and the urban removal actually started in 1921 as well, because there's a colony west of here, a gentleman named Charles Page, who founded Sand Springs and built the Charles Page Railroad, which actually ran down Greenwood. His family, his wife, they had a orphanage and a widow's center. Well, his wife found out that there were black people hiding in Mohawk Park. He said, we need to send cars out there to rescue those people. Charles Page thought, I have an idea. Let's go get these people. This is in her journal. Let's go get these people. But the reason he went and got them is because relocation was easier than having to let them come back. So they founded a colony. He sold a bunch of land to one of his compadres and said, let's sell it $1 an acre, and they can build a colony. And they called it Beaufort Colony. So all those people who never came back formed a colony in another town across the river. But anyway, after what you mentioned about the going to the courthouse and a battle ensued, we're speeding it up now. They went in and started detaining people once they were able to penetrate Greenwood. They mainly penetrated from the east because there were soldiers defending from the west on top of the hilltops. When they came in, they took them all to Convention Hall, which is now Brady Theater. Tate Brady was the founder of the city, one of the city's boosters. He was also a participant in the massacre. He was a brutal during the what they call the Wobblies of World War I, right? He was part of tarring and feathering. This all documented. These people sued him, said we recognize his face. He was one of the people who tarred and feathered 18 men. And he said in the military tribunal, because the city denied him ever being a Klansman until she and I started this fight to change Brady Street, the name Brady Street, from a Klansman's name to another name. And and the whole city fought us, even the mayor, and was like, look, you guys are walking a slippery slope. I never understood why he said that until I got all the documents. And the documents, I had to go get the military tribunal from the OU library. And the city has denied to this point that he was ever a Klansman. In the military tribunal, he states, "I'm a proud Klansman, just like my father." And I built my house as a replica of General E. Lee's
And
house.
you found that?
Yeah. He said, my father would turn over in his grave if he knew how you guys were trying to run politics in the city. That was his testimony in the military tribunal. At that point, nobody could ever deny that he was a Klansman. And he
was
states,
involved
he states, "I was a night watchman the night of the massacre, and I watched them drag black bodies up and down the street behind cars." So you got a testimony like that, and you know, got people fighting to hold on to this name to the very end. But they detained people in this building, Convention Hall. Many women saw, and people saw their family members come out, primarily men, former veterans, never come back out. There's a rumor that they were incinerated in the furnaces in the basement. And everybody used to always say when I was a kid, Brady Theater's haunted. You know, I never knew, you know, what any story behind it. They just said it was haunted. These are men who were being marched to Convention Hall. These are people who you just never see again. So the idea was remove them from their homes, steal everything, furniture, clothing, everything. People would have testified about having seen. One lady said, "I saw my daughter's dress," because it was prom night. They were getting ready for prom the night that happened. She said, "I saw my daughter's dress I just made on another child's body." Fur coats, furniture. They took postcards and had pictures of stuff on the side of the street. Then after they looted the homes, they burned them down. Then the fire department reported 175 bodies found dead inside of homes. This is stuff that's later found in file cabinets, much later after the massacre. But how can you come up with a number like you come up with? But it's because you kept the fire department out. They wouldn't let the fire department come in.
You have to start going
Yeah.
outside.
So anyway, that just kind of gives you an outline of some of the places we take you to during the massacre, and we'll show you, give you some better perspective.
Yeah.
Take you to.
Oh,
Oh, this is your folder. So.
Can you take a picture?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you for coming, Vernon.
Oh my gosh, yeah, my honor. Thanks for